You've got to figure out the story that you tell because you must. Not because it seemed like a good idea or you could get people to watch. You have to tell the story that you must tell because you think you can tell it. Everybody only has one story to tell, one true through line. And the stories that we always tell, these stories about artists, they're about art. And it's somebody most of the time that has this achievement, kind of loses that place in the art world, which everybody does, and then has some kind of redemption. That's our story.
I'm really excited to say that today's episode, it's going to be interactive with Click. On Click, you're able to answer polls, provide your opinions, ask questions, answer questions, just get a more immersive experience as if you're actually there and a part of the conversation. If you're interested, please click on the link down below, and I will see you there. You guys share stories of very well-known artists and some who have been lost through time. What are some of the differences between telling the stories of very well-known artists and those who aren't?
I think that they have one thing in common, and that is that the unknown artists haven't had that moment of recognition, of joy, so they're still kind of in the mire, and the well-known artists have had that moment of recognition, but have slipped back into a place that doesn't lend itself to them being very well known. So at the time that we try to tell the stories, we are at all times looking for somebody who maybe had a moment and lost it, or hasn't had a moment yet, but we expect might. And so we're trying to catch them at that trough. And then we try to go with them either to a new place, or we try to go with them after they've been to a great moment and try to regenerate that place. The films help artists a lot that way.
Yeah, as far as I'm concerned, they're all unknown, even the well-known. I mean, that's the only way we can approach the project, right? Because we are looking for what people don't know. They may know an aspect of somebody's life, right? Or they may have seen the work, but they don't really know the person behind the work. And so that's where we come in, right? And we're curious, just like any member of our audience would be. So we want to know these people. That's why we do these projects, right?
And the artists that we work with are generally not well known, because those stories are they kind of are harder to tell, frankly, the unknown artists. The well-known artists, you can go to, a clip file. They don't have clip files anymore. You can go to the internet and you can learn all about them immediately. It takes very little time. But these artists, there's a lot of exploring to do. You're trying to think about what was their psychological makeup at the time that they were having either a great moment or aspiring to a great moment. So it's a more interesting story to tell, I think, than we're able to do that. We're able to go in because we just do all of our films ourselves. We're able to go in and look for the story that is just a little different.
Yeah, I mean, I really like that approach. Like, regardless of the status of the artist, you guys are treating each project, going in and just like exploring that unknown aspect. Now, when it comes to, you guys are dealing with the stories of artists who are both alive and dead too. What are the initial strategies you guys take in order to explore and to find out the stories of these artists?
It's interesting because I think most of the ones we've done lately have been artists that are no longer with us. So I have to go back and think. But we've done music, right? Docs, Dennis, where the people are very much alive, very much in the process of making work, right? And that's really fascinating. So you were asking, Michael, what are the different approaches?
Yeah, like how you guys initially approach each project.
Okay.
I think from an approach, one of the things I always worry about before I commit to any film is what are the assets? What is available? And with a living artist, of course, you always have that protagonist. In most cases, you have that protagonist available to you to be able to either be the person that will lead you through the process, or be able to give you backfilling, backstory, things like that. When we're making films of an artist that has passed, I'm very careful about that, to not select a story in which I don't have some kind of I use traditional assets, mostly traditional archival footage, audio archival. Photographs are generally not enough. I've always got to have something else to go with it. Um, in the film we recently just released together, George V, we were able to get from George's friends who had been this box had been sitting in a closet for 50 years. And in the box were films that George had made about himself and people that he was both friends and almost family with. That's just a gift from the gods when you get that. One of the joyful aspects of the film is George dancing around and George making his art and things like that. If you don't have that, it's very hard to create texture in the film. And so when we made the film about Clifford Still, a very well-known abstract expressionist artist from the 1950s, I got into the project and I looked up and I said, man, I might be in a little trouble here. There's a lot of photography. There's the art. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But what else is there? And I got lucky because they found during the shoot, during the making of the film, which took almost, I don't know what, 5 years maybe, I think, they found both 34 hours of audio and 28 minutes of Super 8 movies of him home, like any family would shoot back then. That was a thing. You had a Super 8 camera and you kind of cranked it and you shot your family. And it humanized him greatly. And the film turned out complete. I mean, it liberated Dia to tell both sides of the story in the edit. Assets are key.
Yeah. And sometimes we have them in the start, and sometimes, as Dennis mentioned, they will pop up in the process of making something. So there's a lot of, happy accidents, as we call them, where we're like, okay, we're committed, we're making this work, and we don't know what we're going to find right in the process. And things find us, which is, I think, what's the beauty of taking your time with these projects. That's something that we have been good about, kind of like waiting for the project to be ready for us in a way. Like
the longer we take, the luckier we
better.
get.
Yeah,
In terms of the word seeps out. We don't push the projects until they're done. But people ask both of us all the time, what are you working on? We do things like this. And they say, well, what are you working on next? And the word begins to percolate out. And suddenly you get that fortuitous, wonderful phone call. And somebody says, I got this box of stuff in my closet. You might be interested. And you're like, yes. So it is. Dee is right. The longer we wait, the better we get.
Yeah.
Especially in documentary filmmaking, you guys are talking about 34 hours or 28 hours of audio and then the 30 minutes of video, and things kind of coming together over time, allowing the story, their lives, to kind of digest amongst yourselves over time. It probably creates new possibilities and different arcs to the story. And one thing I'm very curious about, you guys are dealing with these large files and boxes of every single artist. How do you guys go through all that information and select what pieces you want to include in the story?
I don't have to say a word. That's all Dia.
Yeah.
I become a collector of things that, the production basically ends up living with me. So I have, Dennis, I have a lot of stuff that I need to return to you, by the way, from our last project. But, I mean, we take things as they arrive to us, and we'll take them in any state. And then as we hone into the story, right, and we start to structure our story, we go back, and at least for our last project, Naked Ambition, right, we had practically I don't know, like thousands of photographs to our availability, but they were digitized at different stages, and they were at different formats. Maybe I have access to the negative, I have access to the print, and maybe we have access to several prints and several digital formats. So it's a task. It becomes really a task, but we take everything, we organize everything, and then it's really a task at the end of finishing a project where you have to go back and be like, okay, now let's select the best copy available to us. And I have to say, this is where we're really lucky to have a team where we're able to recruit assistants and, help us with that process, because it's extremely time consuming. So you've gone through the process of like putting the story together, right? Editing, organizing, figuring out what you want to say. And then comes the technical task of making sure that every asset that you have, it's presented in the best format possible. Right. So we've learned a lot. I have to say we were lucky enough to work with some professionals in the past, like Prudence Arndt, who did archival work for us with Clifford still. And she's amazing. And she was a great teacher for me in terms of like how to keep everything organized, how to keep everything labeled so that you don't lose track of your assets.
We also we have a community organization in town called the Wolfson Archive, and that is a place where the Wolfson family, who owned the first television station in Miami, have donated all of the original reels from the 50s on forward till 40s even on forward. And what they'll do for us is we will bring them the footage in whatever format it is, and they have every single uh, uh, technology to be able to take the footage and put it on a digitized version. So, for example, in Naked Ambition, you saw a couple of times where the footage had clearly been eaten by like wolves or something. It was all chewed up and all kind of uh, bacteria everywhere. It was like, and we were able to use some of that footage because it just puts you in that place. It puts you in the 1950s. And, it was a little hard to see, but I can't tell you how many people came up to us and said, that really made me understand kind of that moment where you were and what was going on. And so we're not afraid to use footage that isn't of the highest broadcast quality. Dia said it perfectly. We use what we get and we use it in ways that make it make sense for what it is. A lot of times people are looking for perfect footage, and if they don't have it, they won't use it. In the Naked Ambition example, Dia looked at me, she goes, "It's just too much." I mean, who would ever, as a filmmaker, say I have too much great footage? But it is sometimes, because it's just like when you're shooting. You can do an interview with somebody that's 400 hours, but you got to watch it all, and you got to look at it. You got to find out what's best. So as judicious as you used to have to be with film, and I never used film. I was, I didn't come into filmmaking until about 16 years ago. So, when you used film, you were very judicious about it. You had a tight script. You asked your questions carefully. And in digital, you can just sit there all day and meander around and not do it. But then you go to the editor and say, here's a 17-hour interview with your subject. And they go, what do you want me to do with this? So we actually start out with pretty tight parameters as to what we're going to chase, and then we leave ourselves open to, as Dia said, the happy surprise.
Yeah, and especially in Naked Ambition, not using the perfect footage. Well, actually, to me, it felt perfect. I mean, I got a sense of what it was like in Miami in the 1950s during this revolution, and Bunny Yeager being at the forefront of it. Like, I was walking in Bunny Yeager's shoes, and being one with her story, first being a model and then being the prettiest photographer out there as well.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
laughing because, sorry, some of my students, they were asking me, it's like, oh, what kind of effects did you use here? And looking at the film. And it's funny to me that there's a generation of people who don't know what film looks like after a certain amount of time, that it's a physical medium. That is, is subject to the elements. And they thought we went and created an effect on this.
Right.
No,
That makes
that's
me very
really.
happy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think there's some sort of resurgence of people wanting to see vintage film. Like, I see a lot of people shooting with older cameras to
Yeah,
capture that aesthetic. It gives like an old time feel, like a different generational feel compared to like the Ultra 6K that
yeah,
we
yeah.
have right now. So I'd love to know, you guys have a very big responsibility in terms of capturing the legacy of every single artist, right? There's a lot of trust that's being put into your hands? Obviously, the right hands. You guys have had experience time and time again, but how do you two and your overall team ensure that the legacy is being maintained and captured in the light that best suits the artist?
We, in particular, the two of us, worry about that a lot. Um, the first thing that happens is that I encourage anybody that I'm going to make a film about, or their their progeny, their sons, their daughters, who are going to help us. I encourage them to watch the films that we've made already, because I always tell the funny idea that we don't do gotcha films. We're not like 60 Minutes. I'm not looking for something salacious that I can put in the film just to put it in the film. It's not what we do. We made a decision long ago that what we're here for is to give artists who have done or will do something important the opportunity to be seen in a medium that reaches the most people. And clearly film is the thing that reaches the most people. So we're very careful about that to start. The most difficult moment for me every single time is when I show the film to the family, if the artist is gone, or if I show the film to the artist, if the artist is still here. And I don't do it until the very, very, very end, because it's too easy for the artist to assume that we're making a film with them, because they're artists, they're creatives just like we are, as opposed to about them. And so we don't show them till the very end. And I really lose sleep over that. When Clifford Still's daughter uh, saw the film, I was really nervous, because she's tough as nails and she cared about her father's legacy and she channels her father's legacy. And when she called me up and said, "Boy, thank you. You really got it." I mean, I wasn't happy. I was relieved, because I feel a huge sense of responsibility. And D is important to that too, because sometimes I'll go down a path, if you will, about something, and Dia will reel me back in and say, let's be a little more either fair or even generous. And that's the kind of filmmakers we are. We're not. A lot of documentary filmmaking feels like journalism, where they're trying to make sure that they present it in a way that is both sides of the story, or they're looking for something difficult. I mean, our stories are factual, but as you know, from Rashomon or anywhere else, it depends on what side you're looking from.
Yeah. Now, one interesting thing that you mentioned, Dennis, right? You're showing these films either to the artist or to their kids. I want to know a little bit more about the kids, or maybe even grandchildren, in terms of Bunny Yeager's grandchildren that you
Uh-huh.
guys interviewed. What's it like dealing with their kids versus actual artists themselves?
Well, I think the issue is that the biggest pain point, the biggest difficulty is before they decide to go forward, because it's so easy just to say, "I pass." Nah, don't want to do it. When I think of Clifford Still's daughter, the second daughter, I guess she was the older daughter, she turned us down for 3 years. And
Wow.
and at the end of the 3 years, the film was well into the 85%, zone of being done. Her daughter, the granddaughter, called me up and says, "Mom will talk to you now." And I was like, "Why?" I didn't understand why she would do that. And the other thing that was in complete lucky break is they were out just east of Oakland somewhere, Alameda, I think it was. And Dia and Ed just happened to be going there in like a week, or were there in a week or something like that. So I was like, great. We scrambled a crew. We got there. We shot her, and she was tremendous. She was honest and open and emotional. But the odd thing is she never spoke again after that. She had a little mini stroke, and I felt in a way like, wow, maybe we asked her difficult questions. We did not ask her difficult questions, but I think her father and the relationship was very traumatizing to her. And so we felt very fortunate that she was willing to take the time to talk to us and tell us how she felt and why she loved her father, but at the same time, why she was uncomfortable with her father. He leaned over the crib one day and said to her, "I love you, babe, but you'll never be the number one thing in my life. The painting will be." And so how do you live with that? She just passed recently in the last, I don't know, year or so. And, but that was a moment that I'll never forget when the granddaughter picked up the phone and said to me, Mom will talk to you. And I had subjects die before. Bunny, as I think we talked about, but Bunny died the day I was supposed to interview her. And that was a very difficult time for me. We put the film on the shelf and just forgot about it for 3 years.
I think what's interesting here, and what we notice sometimes is that the film plays. We actually, maybe this is a little too much to share, but I feel like the film helps family members come to terms with their relationship with whoever it is that we're making the film about. I've seen this happen time and time again, and I feel like, oh, we're actually doing good. You're actually giving this person a chance to resolve whatever issue they had with a parent, with a loved one, that maybe they didn't have a chance to do it. And it could be just synchronicity. We just happen to be there at the right time. I don't know what it is, but I've seen it happen time and time again. We saw it in Clifford still. It happened in Naked Ambition, right? There's two daughters. One is very much in favor of her mom's work and wants to celebrate her mom's work, and one who felt like this was the exposure was too much, and she was a devout Christian, and she didn't really agree that with the type of work that her mom was doing, and ended up being the daughter that was skeptical about her mom's legacy, ended up being, I think, the one who embraced the film at the end of the process as a huge surprise to us. And I think I mean, very much goes back to what Dennis said earlier, that we're approaching our subjects with a lot of respect. We are looking for the human story, right? And we think that, we are motivated by the need to do justice to whoever it is that we're making the film about. And making justice means, yes, we'll say the good, we'll say the bad, but ultimately we're presenting this person as another human story.
Yeah,
Right.
we didn't pretend that Bunny's husband didn't commit suicide. He did commit suicide, and we don't pretend that those things happen. In our film, The Last Resort, one of the two subjects was murdered. And, we don't pretend that those things don't happen, but we do try to give dignity to the subjects. And sometimes, particularly with journalists, critics, we get accused of making films that are too hagiographic, too honoring our subject. And I'm okay with that. That doesn't bother me a bit. I've been in the art world a long time. I know how hard it is to make art. I know what people aspire to. And if that's the focus of my practice, I'm perfectly fine with that. And I've been offered films a bunch of times where it's going to require me to kind of, make it a little more difficult for my subject, dead or alive. And I simply just pass. It's not what I'm doing. You read the reviews of Naked Ambition, and people say, love the film. I think we had about 85 to 90% favorable reviews. But the 10% that pushed back were like, well, I needed more dirt. I needed more difficulty. I needed more this or that. And we just tell them as we see them, to be honest. We don't set out for with an effort to try to find something wrong with the person. Making art is so hard that we just want to. Dia said it probably. We're interested in honoring the person with their story. We're not interested in honoring them by giving them a medal or anything like that. We're interested in honoring them, their lives, their practices. Because in all of our films, the one thing you come away with is how darn hard it is to be creative and to make art. That's really that's really the through line to all the films. It's really, really hard. And we're making films about, you think about Bunny, who was on the front page of the New York Times when she died, and you think about George V., the 12-minute film we just made about this Ukrainian immigrant who started making art when he was in his 60s. And after he passed, 50 years after he passed, he had his first big museum show, and it was a huge hit. In both cases, it's about how hard it is to make great art and how hard it is to have people see your art. That's a hard thing, too. I'm a working visual artist now, and I've been very fortunate to have some of my work be seen. But there are people laboring in obscurity, day after day, waiting for that to happen. And it doesn't happen to too many.
Yeah. I mean, to push back on the negative reviews for Naked Ambition, I thought there was a good deal of conflict towards the end, kind of how Bunny lost. I mean, she lost everything as
Everything.
naked photography and videography came into the light. Like she had to, have a bunch of side hustles, like doing photography, singing, which is also a testament to her creative, you know, uh, to her creativity. Like the fact that she could sing in these jazz clubs as well. And one thing that you said that really stood. Well, actually, I think Dia said this, but honoring the artist. Now, to kind of expand on this, on this idea, how do you guys both honor the artist and yet still tell the truth when the truth is painful?
Yeah. I think that one thing Dee and I agree about is to the extent that we have it, the artist's work is always a primary protagonist. It's almost alive in each of the films. So we're attracted to the artist generally, not because of who they are, but because of what they did within their practice, what they were interested in. So we almost always make the art a star of the film. And that's an important thing because you can get caught up in an artist's life in a way that it becomes all about personality and fame and money and those things. And you can lose sight of the art. In a way, Picasso has that issue with the five wives and the crazy lifestyle and all those things. And yet when you're all done, you go stand before a Picasso and you're thinking about the extraordinary nature of the work. Bunny's practice is like that. George V's practice is like that. He was just a guy sitting in a 9 by 12 foot room, on the third floor of Ocean Drive in South Beach, working every day, filling up his room every day, and with art. And so that's an important component of what we do is making the art the star of the film sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's exactly it. Like by the way, the two are not mutually exclusive, right? You can still honor the person and tell the truth about who they are, what they did. But I think by placing the work at the forefront is, this is our sort of like our vehicle to experience this person, right? That's what drives us to get to know them better through the work, right? So even with Bani, you see her life's trajectory, but you see how it impacts her work, right? And I think, yeah, number one, just like Dennis mentioned, we do films about artists that we do admire, right? We love the work. We have been lucky to be able to do these type of projects. And number two, just saying that the truth about somebody's work and process, honors them in so many ways. This is not a difficult thing to do. I think that the difficult thing is to stay true to that, right? That's what we try. That's really what's guiding us in the editing, in the post-production process. Yeah, I think it's easy to fall victim to certain ways of doing things that may be good for audience reactions or, for different reasons, right? But we're not interested in that.
But that's also the reason that we just self-fund our films. In other words, I don't really want to take notes, to be honest. I've done a few gigs where somebody was paying me to make a film, and I didn't like it at all. I just I'm much happier making the film with this incredible team that we have, that we want to make, that we negotiate amongst ourselves without having somebody who, because they're putting money into a film, think that they can tell you how to change the film, remake the film, et cetera. There's just no joy in that for me. And every time I've done it, I've looked back and said, boy, you're not going to do that again. And then I get seduced by a gig somewhere because I love the film. And, I just don't do it very often. And I try never to do it because I'm happy with what we do and how we do it. And I mean, I think the proof is in itself. The last 5 films we made have all gotten national distribution. And in most of the cases, international distribution, which for documentaries is a hard look. It's a very difficult thing to do. And I think that it's because we're true to who we are and what we want to see in the films. People read that. They can tell that. And they want to be surprised, which we're able to do most of the time just because of the impossibility of achievement that some of these our artists get to. And they want to have some joy, which is my favorite thing about making films. And at the end, that reads true to people. When you go to see one of our films, you're going to be surprised you're going to learn something about an artist. Everybody comes out of the films, I didn't know that about Bunny, or I didn't know that about that there was a George V. Those kinds of things are, that's what's meaningful to us as an audience tool. Dee is an educator. She's been a professor for years. So she's used to teaching people things, teaching them how to do things, teaching them what to know about things. And so that comes through in the edits all the time. She's in there and she's really trying to tell the story in a way that she enjoys surprising you. And at the same time, she wants you to come away with a learned experience.
Dear, you are meticulous in your editing. I mean, I saw that you edited the Naked Ambition story, and I said it at the very beginning. And watching every single photo, the way it was placed, every single video, I gotta take my hat off to you. And overall, I really respect what you guys do, right? You guys are telling the stories of artists who deserve the light. You're sharing people's stories. I think that's something that is so invaluable, and it connects us, right? Now,
Michael, what kind of stories are you going to tell?
What kind of stories am I going to tell?
Yeah.
That's a good question.
Because I got to tell you, okay, I just want to say this. Everybody only has one story to tell, one true through line to tell. And the stories that we always tell, these stories about artists, they're about art, and it's somebody most of the time that has this achievement, kind of loses that place in the art world, which everybody does, and then has some kind of redemption. That's our story. We tell it over and over and over again in very different ways. George V, nobody ever heard of him, suddenly has a show at the High Museum. Clifford still has a show at the Met, but then what happens? He's forgotten. Bunny's on Johnny Carson. Probably don't know what Johnny Carson is. Bunny's on the Tonight Show. You know what that is. And then she can't make a house payment, and then the world comes back to her. That's our story. We tell it. What is your through line? And when you're going to be making some films, you're working on a film now. What's your through line?
Dennis, I love that question. I mean, my entire time hosting the podcast, no one has spun it back on me. But let me tell you, I am very big into mindfulness and presence. I want to tell stories of how people have learned to be present in this world, whether that's meditation, yoga, anything. That's what gets me going. Those are the types of documentaries and stories that I want to tell.
See, I couldn't tell that story in a million years. I'm too OCD and too crazy and too this and too that. But that's your story to tell. Never forget that's your story. You own that story. You never want your viewers to forget that either. You've got to figure out the story that you tell because you must. Not because it seemed like a good idea or you could get people to watch. You have to tell the story that you must tell because you think you can tell it. And people forget that sometimes. They say, oh, I'm going to do this and then I'm going to do that. And then you look back and you have this very disparate body of work. And people say, but what really were you about,
Oops.
I know where I am.
How
Watch telling me it doesn't know where I am.
How do you have that conviction? How did you guys find out that these stories were yours to tell?
What do you think, Dia? I mean, we've been doing this together for a while now.
I think, I think it's a little bit of both, right? You find a story that you're really interested in, but also once you commit to telling a story, there's a sense of responsibility, right? It's I'm responsible, right? If somebody entrusted me with this task, I'm responsible for saying this story, and we spend time. We take our time with these stories. So there's got to be some, it is a process. And through actually telling these stories, we discover ourselves, So if I'm going to devote my time, I have to make sure that what I'm doing is something I fully believe in, I'm fully committed to, right? So every project we approach it with this kind of sensibility, right?
And
with
passion.
this kind of commitment. Yeah. And if we didn't want to do that, right? I mean, and that's the reason why we make these films. And, if we didn't have this sense of commitment and responsibility, we wouldn't be making them. We wouldn't be filmmakers. We would be
Yeah.
doing something else that's more meaningful. But to us, it's very meaningful. It's that important. We don't, we take this very seriously. It's a responsibility.
Yeah.
What kind of story are we going to put out about Bunny Yeager, right? How are we going to feel about what we're putting out there? And I remember early on when I was a student, I had an editing professor who told me back then when I was starting is that you put out on the screen who you are. No matter what you do, when you finish a project and you put it out there, it's part of you. It's who you are, that the screen is transparent. And I think what this did is shocked me in understanding how important it is that what we do very carefully, because it's going to be seen by other people, because it's going to impact other people. So, we know people are going to see it. We know people are going to have opinions about it, right? So we want to make sure that we do it right. So doing it right as far as I'm concerned, is doing it right by myself, right? If I feel good about what I'm doing, then hopefully that translates to the screen, and other people feel good about what they see.
Yeah. I would amplify two of those points. One of the things you're going to begin to see and learn when you start making films is there are two joyful points in making a film. The first point is when you figure out what you're going to make and you're excited about it and you've got a log line, maybe you have a synopsis, and you're really excited about it. And the other point is when it's done. And in the middle, what we call it is the ugly middle.
Yep.
And the only thing that gets you through the ugly middle, because these films are damn hard to make, the only thing that gets you through the ugly middle is your passion for the story, your belief in the story, your belief that the story deserves to be told. And that's the only thing that gets you through, because sometimes you look up and you go, why did I've done this probably 20 times out of the 80 something films that I've made. I look up and I go, why did I ever think I could do this? Particularly in the features, because the features simply kick your ass. They're so hard and there's so many moving parts. And, you just feel like, ugh. Dia and I have developed, though, I have to say, we've developed a way of making features that I think it really, really gives you a lot of positive feedback. And that is, I will go out and shoot and do interviews, and I will feed her archival and she'll feed me archival, and I'll license things. And then we'll sit down after maybe shooting for however many, you shoot 10, 12, 13 people. And we'll say, okay, what do we have today that you can sit down over the next month or so and crank out? I call them vignettes, beats of the story. And her and I will talk, and I'll say, I really think you have everything you need to do beat number 6 in the story. And so she's not starting at the beginning. She's not thinking about the end. She's just saying, yeah, you're right. You guys at Clifford Stowe, you went to London and you shot at the Royal Academy, and we've got this and we've got that. And she's, I think you're right. I think I could bang out 2 minutes, and she does. And then she sends it and we argue over it and we fuss about it and we tighten it up. But then you got a really good 2 minutes, and those 2 minutes, they don't change much after that. It's the first 2 minutes of an 80-minute film. They don't change much because we make every single vignette as if it's a little mini film. And that happens over and over again. And then all of a sudden you look up and you have 20 minutes. And then you look up and you have 28 minutes. And now you're saying, okay, how do I get to the finish line? And then you start working on what we call the interstitials, the transfer points between Bunny as a model and Bunny with her first camera. The stuff in between there. How do you, and the interstitials are very difficult because it's something that you can't say, oh, we're going to use this interstitial here, but we're going to take a completely different approach to the next 12 beats in the story. So that's something we struggle with and think about a lot. That's the first thing. The second thing is we're offered 20 something films, 30 films for everyone we say yes to. I don't even show her half of them. Because I don't want to do them. I don't want to take a chance she might like it, and I don't. So, but she'll show me stuff too. She'll say, somebody said, what about this or what about that? And so, it's very important because of the ugly middle to absolutely be totally committed to the project. And so you got to kiss a lot of frogs before you find the prince or the princess.
It's a pretty good problem to have 30 projects come in for every one that you say yes to, but I can also see where it proves challenging, especially staying focused to the one at hand, especially if you guys are doing these over 3 to 5 year periods.
Yeah.
So you guys have been working together for quite some time now. I remember when we talked last time, you guys were talking a little bit about your dynamic, how Dia is a little bit more sequential and Dennis sees a bigger picture, vice versa. Can you guys talk to me a little bit more about the dynamic that you two have amongst yourselves?
Yeah, I think we're very complementary. I couldn't do it without Dennis. Actually, I'm the editor, but Dennis is far more organized in his approach than I am. And I tend to look for the emotion in the story, right? That's really what gets me engaged in the material. And in order to do that, I'll dig and dig and dig and go to places that maybe I don't need to go. But that's my process. I need to be able to do that in order to find the heart of the story. What is it that we're really talking about? And these are the small breaks that keep me going. That's what drives the story for me. And then what's great is that Dennis will have the whole structure, the whole story out, and I'll be trying to break that down into these other emotional beats. So I think that's where we're really working well because, as I said, I can get lost in these moments, and then Dennis will be like, "Okay, great. I'm glad you got this out of your system. Now let's go back to what this is really about."
Like, now let's go make the movie.
Yeah, exactly. And it is about that, right? I'm so grateful that Dennis allows me to do that because that informs how I will approach the material. And it's also part of me learning the story, right? I'm actually learning the story as I'm putting the story together. And sometimes he will have more exposure because I'm not on the set. I didn't go to the interview, right? So I don't have that whole context. So yeah, and that's where Dennis comes in, and I need him. Like I think I've had this experience of working with Dennis now for several projects, and it's interesting. I don't know how to do it without Dennis. Almost,
Works for me. Yeah. One of the
like I need Dennis. Like when he's not there, he's here on my shoulder talking to me. I bring him in.
One of the first times that we started working together, I'd made a lot of short films, but I tend to make them very pedantically, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, marching, doom, 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 doom. And the first time I worked with Dia and I gave her something and she came back to me and showed me, it was one of these vignettes. And I said to myself, oh my God, what have I done? Because I was so locked into my rote way of doing things that I couldn't see past the fact that it was super different and that she was moving the ideas within the story around. She wasn't losing the ideas. She wasn't telling the ideas in a way that I didn't accept, but she was moving them around. And it didn't dawn on me until I showed it to a few other people. They said, "Ooh, that was really cool the way you did this. That wasn't like your other films, that the music played a huge part and was almost overly loud at some times, or the music was, a little weird. And that really brought me into the story. And I didn't relax for the first 2 or 3 films. It was really difficult for me because I was just locked into my way of doing things. I had a lot of success doing what I was doing. But the films got so much better. They got so much more textured, and there was a real different way of telling a story, and that's like she said. I come into the story with her, and I go, okay, here are the 14 beats of the film. This is this is going to happen, and this and this and this and this, and she goes, great. And I say, and here's the chunks, 4, 5, 6, and 7 in a row. Go work on those. And then she gives it back to me, and it's numbered 6, 7, 4, 5. I go, what are you doing? She goes, no, take your time and slow your roll. It reads better this way. And she's usually right. So the fact that I'm coming in, I give her just enough of a box to work through, just enough of a structure to work through that she feels liberated, so that I would go like this. And Dia goes, like that. And between us, the film has enough of that surprising interest, where you're making moves that you don't expect. And it also has the structure that lets the audience hear our story. Like we almost never, I would say never actually. We almost never start with, she was a child born in Pittsburgh in, 1863, that kind of, we almost never do that. Because I think most of the time that's very uninteresting, but that's the way I used to make films. And with Dia, we're going to tell you something about the kid, about the person's childhood, but we're only going to tell it to you in minute like 36, because it's not going to play a big part in the film unless for some reason, there are facts and circumstances that lead you to that. Bunny was born in Pittsburgh and she moved to Miami at 17 and she was a little shy. Okay. Well, that was it. That's all we told you about Bunny up until age 17. That's it, and then she decided to go do modeling to make herself a little more outgoing. She was also kind of tall and she got a little awkward, but as a model, she could do it. But all that stuff before that, I think we spent 35 seconds on the film, in the film about that. And it didn't come up until minute 30 or so. So that's intentional. And that's Dia.
Yeah. Dennis, I'm a lot like you. I'm very sequential as well. I think it's like my technical foundation kind of playing a role in like boom, 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 boom.
I was an accountant. So,
Right.
I was a lawyer. I mean, if you're not walking the line, then you got problems in those professions.
Oh yeah.
But in creativity, you got to give yourself some rope.
Oh, it's different. I mean, Dia, I think you're the type of person to stop and smell the roses. Um, and I very much value that trait. It's a trait myself I'm trying to expand upon. I have a very good friend. His name is Rafi, and we're driving back from a camping trip. We're all exhausted. Like it's been 4 days in the woods. We're tired, a little bit hungover. We ate way too much. And on the way home, like Rafi's driving, he's stopping by to like little sightseeing in New England, and we're all just hurrying him up. But he's stopping and he's smelling the roses. And that was one of the most valuable lessons that I've learned, because now as I take my approach to film, I try and embrace more of what Dia does, getting lost in the story, giving myself permission to go deeper into it, even if it doesn't serve a greater objective. And let me tell you guys, like that comes back later on because I'm pulling from information and I feel like I know a person so well that it all just comes together later down the road. It's all in my subconscious.
And the audience wants texture.
Yes.
And that little roadside stop is texture.
So much texture.
When
so much texture.
Yeah.
So it is a destination. I mean, you're right. You're obviously making a film that is going to be seen, but if you don't enjoy the process, it's all about the process. That's I think you have to enjoy the journey. You have to allow the journey to change you.
Oh, yeah.
You have to grow with it. So I think that's a part of the. I mean, I'm grateful again that I work with a team that allows me to take my time with the process, because each film and each film has its own process. Like we've done all these different projects and they all came together in very different ways.
Yeah. I've been hugely surprised about that as we've gone forward, is how
different.
The great thing about I tell this metaphor in my class. Dia was kind enough to bring me into the university to teach a couple years. And I tell my class, when you're making a narrative film, you got a script, you got a certain number of days, and when you're done, the film looks like the script. And it's like working with an architect. The architect draws the plans, he shows you a rendering, you build the house, it looks like the plans. When you have a documentary film, it's like renovating an old house. You go in there and you start tearing down the walls and looking inside and go, I didn't know that was there, good and bad. And so for us, that's a really important part of the process, is to stay open enough and flexible enough. Very hard for me, to do that. I'm always saying, well, what's next? We got this, let's, and, but with a documentary film, you've got to stay flexible and give yourself some leeway, basically, you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
it's hard for me.
Yeah.
It's hard for me too. I mean, just what you were speaking to earlier, saying like when you have those two largest strikes of energy and passion in a project at like when you first start and then at the very end, and then Dia is saying, oh, like I get lost in it, like I let the story unwind as I go. And I think there's something beautiful in that unknown in those middle segments, kind of piecing it together. That for me, like once I'm able to give that attention and that presence and just fully accept that, it just naturally comes, and then I enjoy the process just as much as I enjoy the beginning and the end.
You'll fight your natural tendency to tighten everything up the entire time of your film career. Because like I said, I'm blessed. And sometimes Dia goes way off the reservation. And I go, "Ooh,
Right.
settle down, But most of the time now, I understand that, if I'm here and she's here, the film is here, and that's what makes a good film. I've been collecting art for almost 50 years, and I've done it. I bought over 2,000 works of art in 50 years, and my wife and I made a decision after about year 2 or 3 that we were only going to buy things that we agreed about. And I would be the person buying, like I'd come home and say, I found a great new artist. Let's buy 20. And Deborah, my wife, would say, how about we buy 2 or 3? And so we would compromise and buy 2 or 3. But together we were making better decisions as a team than we were separately. And that's the way filmmaking is to me. I don't, somebody wants to be co-director. I'm okay with that. These films, everybody is hands-on in every step of the way. Everybody has input every step of the way. And so the easiest thing for me in the world is to say, God, we did this together. Let's put it out to the world together. And there are some artists that think of themselves, filmmakers in particular, as auteurs, that they have this singular vision and nothing else can, and they're wrong. Because, if you're a visual artist, like I've become recently, you can sit in your studio and paint all day. You don't have to talk to anybody or do anything with anybody. But unless you are a wunderkind, when you're making a film, you want to have somebody who's a better shooter than you are, a better editor than you are, a better graphics person than you are, a better sound. Otherwise, your film isn't going to be as good. And so that requires you to work as a collaborative group. And boy, do I love that. I love having a co-director. I love having an editor that I consider my peer for the making of the film, not just for the edit, but for everything. I love having an editor come back and say, you know what I really need is I need you to go find somebody to interview who either knew this or could talk about that or says this. And I thought, wow, I never thought about that. I got to go do that. So the collaborative aspect, if you're a filmmaker out there, a first time filmmaker, be generous to the people you're working with, because they need credits too. They need the opportunity to be in film festivals too. So the easiest thing in the world as a filmmaker is to be generous with regard to credits and things like that. I mean, I'm a member of the Producers Guild of America now, and the rules are like unbelievably strict, and I guess because there's a lot on the line in terms of money and things like that. But for me, I want people to do the work to have the credits that they want. So be generous as a filmmaker when it comes to credit. You'll never be sorry you did. There's nothing more fun than standing up on the stages with these guys at film festival, and all of us answering questions about our perception of the film and what we did in the film. So it's an easy thing to do, but a lot of people struggle with it.
Agreed. I mean, community is something that it's one of the things I value most, especially community when it comes to a creative project. That's my favorite thing. I don't think anything else beats that. Like each person offering their own perspective, each person in the lane that best suits them, right? People don't need to jump back and forth. Like everyone is doing what they can best do, and that creates art, the best art possible.
Yeah. And I always feel a little guilty because I don't know how to do anything. I feel a little guilty because really being a director for me is simply about building a team and finding a story and letting that team deliver the goods. I can't shoot, I can't edit, I can't do sound, I can't do anything, but I'm pretty good at finding the right people to do that. And that just comes from experience and having a real vision about what the film could be.
Yeah, Dennis is too humble. He's really, really good at that, at doing that, at putting a team together. And he's also really good at trusting you, which basically he gives you the kind of like the confidence to do what you're. I still remember when he came to me and he's like, your next project is Naked Ambition. I mean, we didn't call it Naked Ambition, but it was the documentary of Bunny Yeager. And I'm like, there's no way I am qualified to cut Bunny Yeager. I just didn't see myself doing that. And Dennis is like, no, of course you can do it. I trust you. You're the right person for this. And it took me a while. I was like, why is he saying this? Like, I'm not from Miami. I didn't grow up here. I come from Europe. I grew up in Greece. So a lot of the references were completely new to me, right? I'm
Everybody's naked
sure.
in Greece, but in America, it's okay,
No, not in that way. I mean, it's like, obviously, not. I've have images of the U.S. Living abroad, but a lot of the story was new to me. A lot of it was a process of discovery, right? And at the same time, I'm also very shy as a person. And here's a woman who is putting herself out there, and I'm like, I'm not that type. I
So
don't know if
what's
I can do justice to this woman. And I obviously he was right. I just couldn't see it at the time, and just I loved the work, loved Bunny Yeager's work, loved what I saw, and after a while, I was like, yes, this is these are amazing images, and couldn't believe how artistic the work was, right? And it just took me a while to get to the point where I'm like, yeah, I'm totally confident, totally comfortable with these images myself. And making a documentary about Bounty in a way that really celebrated that. So, I mean, again, all credit to Dennis. Dennis saw it and he's like, yeah, you're the person who can do justice to Bounty's work. I was like,
Well,
me?
again, the other thing is that when you're making a story is you have to ask yourself if you have the right people, because in the case of Bunny in particular, we didn't have, if it wasn't for Dia, we didn't have a woman in a place in the film that was going to reflect being a woman. I can be as empathetic and wonderful as I can be, but that's not that's not my place. That's not it. I can't, I didn't live that life, so I can't have that moment. I can talk about it and explain it and tell people. But when Dee got into the edit, like she said, being not from around here was a big deal. It helped a lot because she would look at things and go, like, why in America was this such a big deal? Or why are men thinking this way as opposed to that way? So that was it was a very positive result for the film, very positive. And in today's climate and in today's culture, those things matter tremendously. It's very difficult for me to not make certain films because people say that's not your story to tell. I struggle with that mightily. And in fact, early in my career, I worked with two African-American filmmakers, and we made a lot of films about African-American artists and moments and things like that. And there were stories that I found, but these guys had grown up like we made a film about hats, why African-American women wear hats to church. And my co-director, he had grown up in those churches. So it's great to say like that you can tell that story, but you got to bring in authenticity with it. And to make the story of Bunny Yeager and to not have a feminine perspective, not a feminist perspective, a feminine perspective would have been a huge mistake. Would have been wrong. And so you've got to give yourself, that's why the collaborations are so important. You've always got to be asking yourself, is there another way to tell this story that I'm not telling simply because I don't have the life experience for it, And it's an interesting thing you always have to think about. In today's climate, you have to think about it twice as much.
Yeah, there's a very good. I don't know if you guys have seen it, but there's a very good clip of Denzel Washington talking about the same thing, like having black directors talk about things with black culture and white directors, like, Martin Scorsese, he's showing the Italian American life versus, another black director might be showing something in that sphere at the same time. So it's literally touching on what you're saying. And
Yeah. Yeah.
it can be challenging too, because, it seems like you guys are both very interested about a wide range of stories, and having or being able to step back and having other people who understand it better take the forefront in terms of shaping the story. It is challenging.
It is. It's hard for me because I think a creative ought to be able to tell uh, any story that they can sort out, and um, uh, but you also have to honor the fact that people have lived different experiences, and that in order to tell it in a way that's see, it's about authenticity more than anything.
Yeah.
Else. You've got to come from a place of authenticity. When we're talking about contemporary art in our practice that Dee and I have together, I have 50 years I have lived, I have my Malcolm Gladwell 10,000 hours probably 20 times. I have lived
Right.
that experience over and over and over again. So there's no question about authenticity there. But when you're starting to think about other subjects, or that the story is so heavily wrought with something else, you got to just think about, well, who else do I need to help me bring authenticity to the story?
One thing I'm very curious about, Dennis, you said you were an accountant and then a lawyer, and then you jumped into the arts, right? And Dia, I know you're a professor before you jumped. Well, you're still a professor, of course, but you're being a professor while jumping into the filmmaking space. Would you guys talk a little bit more about how you guys got to where you're at in terms of creating film?
I mean, Dia, why don't you start? Because you were in it from the very beginning. You were in it to win it, right?
Yeah, I mean,
Right from the
I'm a
start.
professor of filmmaking, so I'm teaching.
That's such a cool title, by the way, Professor of Filmmaking.
Yeah, a professor of cinematic arts, to be honest, because I'm in a department of cinematic arts at the School of Communication at the University of Miami. So, yeah, I'm actually privileged, in a way that I actually do have a whole institution behind me, right? That they support me not only to teach, but to do my creative work, which is how I managed, to actually get involved with the film projects that we do with Dennis. And I actually get supported by the school. I have the opportunity to apply for grants for the work that I do. So it really is an ideal situation for the type of work that we do. So, but in terms of how you want to talk about the starting in film, or when did film become
Yeah, like
important? Yeah.
what were you doing before you did film, and then what made you jump into it?
So I got into film as a student, as an undergraduate student. I was a student studying communication in Greece. And I was in a brand new department where my professors were experimenting. And they're like, hey, this is a new department. I was basically one of the first class that got into this brand new department. And so they thought that they should expose us to everything. So they brought in filmmakers, film directors to teach us cinema. And one of my professors decided that we will make a short film as a class. And though this was not a filmmaking program, that's how I got my start in film. And it was very much a collaborative process. We all the students got to write together, direct together, shoot the film, and then stay for the post-production process and the editing. And that's where I fell in love with the process. Really what it drew me in was the collaborative aspect of filmmaking. I've always been interested in the arts. I always admire arts, but I've never experienced anything like filmmaking, the collaborative part of filmmaking. And I was like, wow, this is insane. This is great. And it kind of like grew from there. So I knew after finishing school, I had a chance to work with local filmmakers in Greece for a little bit. And then I decided, okay, I really want to learn how to properly do this. So then that's basically what led me to the States, where I did graduate studies in filmmaking. And then really not knowing where I'm going to go. Eventually, I think the plan was to go back to Greece, but teaching presented itself as an opportunity. And I thought, why not? And cut to many years later, here we are. So yeah, it really the passion for film was developed through the process of making a film for the first time as a student, and really enjoying the process. Everything about it was so new, so different from anything I've done before. That was it for me.
Yeah, I mean, right now, like I'm in the phase of being exposed to the novelty of film, and
Yeah.
I kind of broke it down. It's like I spent so much time in college thinking about, oh, what am I going to do when I graduate? Like so much time, and I kind of made it simple. It's like if it energizes me, I'm just going to do it. And especially in film, like I feel so energized. I get to be with people. I get to do something creative. I get to share stories, and I think stories, like they bring us together. They shape the world. They last. Like that's been at our core as humans, telling stories. And now it's like, what stories am I going to tell? As Dennis asked me.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I think exactly the same thinking. For me, was if it challenges me, I want to do it.
Mm,
And it was really, filmmaking was a challenge, working collaboratively on one story that we all decided to write together. This was unlike anything I had experienced before. And for somebody who grew up experiencing film but not really knowing any filmmakers, that was, for me, that was, didn't even think that, I never saw myself as a filmmaker, to be honest. But going through the process of making a project like that, I was like, wow, this is amazing. This is such a, really empowering and at the same time humbling experience.
Yeah, that's
Right?
those are the
It's
two perfect phrases.
extremely empowering if if you can convince a group of people to work on this singular vision for a period of time, right, and produce this idea out of thin air and make it into something that people celebrate. Much more people celebrate than actually people were involved in the making. Then there's something really powerful there.
oh
And
yeah.
I did enjoy films as a young person. I was very much challenged by films. The films that I enjoyed are the films that made me think for days about, oh, wow, what was that all about?
That's how you know it's a good film. It makes you think for days
Exactly.
after. That's how I feel
Exactly.
like if I'm
Excellent.
thinking about the movie the next day, I know it was a good film.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's true.
But
Yeah,
yeah, but
mine's
it's
a
the
little
process, I
different
think, that, yeah, go for it.
in the sense that I turned 53 years old, and I didn't have a creative practice of any kind. I actually had been an entrepreneur, started a lot of businesses, um, and felt that entrepreneurship was a pretty creative practice, but not an artistic practice, obviously. And I always wanted, I shouldn't say I always wanted, I was afraid to have a creative practice because I mostly fear failure more than I celebrate success. And I woke up one day and I said, gosh, I really want to have a creative practice of some kind. And being in the art world at the level that I have been, it wasn't really at that point in time an opportunity for me to make visual art. You would think that's what I know, that's what I would do. But in fact, the visual art world was not interested in having a collector who put a lot of effort and funding into the world of visual arts stop doing that and start making their own art. And I felt that. It's it's a very difficult thing to do, to make that transition. I've made it, but only a half a dozen years later. So I said, well, what could I do? And and I thought, well, if I could do something that was visual art adjacent, how could I be involved in the visual arts with a creative practice, but at the same time not be making art? And so I decided to make a short film, one single 5-minute short film. And it's like when you go to the racetrack for the first time and you win your first bet, you think, man, this is easy. I'm going to keep doing this. And our first film did incredibly well, and it played everywhere, and we won prizes, and I was like, oh yeah, I got this. This is simple. But I had very good partners at the time. They're very talented, and we did a bunch of things together, and uh, and then I just got the bug, and I've made, like I think I mentioned, 80 shorts and 7 features in 16 years, 17 years now. So that's a lot of films, and but that's how I work usually, is I go very immersive on something. And then I wake up one day and say, you know what, did that, gonna go do something else now. But fortunately for me, art collecting, which I've been doing for almost 50 years, my marriage, which I've had for almost 50 years, and now filmmaking is only the third thing that I've done that's lasted more than 5 or 6 or 7 years. Because I just, like as Dia was saying, you can feel the passion in her voice. I just love it. I love doing it. I love telling these stories. I love honoring these artists. And so for me, it's really, and I love the way that we do it. I think that people don't want to lose sight of the fact that we're very privileged to be able to do it in the way that we do it. Whether it's a 12-minute film or an 80-minute film, we take our time. There's no one there telling us you've got to get this done by Tuesday, or I need the trailer, I need the. We just take our time. When the film is ready, it tells us it's ready. And when it's not ready, you just keep going. You just keep working. And if for some reason you can't work on it for 6 weeks, then you can't work on it for 6 weeks. Dia's got 2 kids and a day job. I mean, that's life. I had a day job up until about a year or two ago. For 55 years, I had a day job. So you do it when you can do it. That doesn't stop you from doing it at the highest level. You don't have to do it every day to work at the highest level. You just have to work at the highest level. And that's what we've tried to do in terms of production value and things like that. So that's a very important part of it, is that I decided one day I wanted to have a creative practice. I knew I wanted it to be something about the arts because that's my passion. And I was able to use filmmaking as a way of putting myself back into the art world as a creative, but not making art. Now I'm making art full time. I have, sorry, I'm shaking there. I had film, I do films and I make visual art, and it's a very happy existence, I must say.
Yeah, Dennis, you're like a second version of George Voronovsky. I think he started at 50 as well.
Yeah, about the same. Yeah, we're about the same age when we started. It's true. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
I told you earlier, I think it's so cool that
it's
you.
weird to be an emerging visual artist. Most visual artists that are emerging are young
Mhm.
because they started young. But it is weird to be an emerging visual artist at, after 7 decades, basically. That's an odd thing for me. And one of the funnest things about it, though, is that my mentors are all younger than me, all of them. I don't work with people. That's also one of the joys of doing this in a collaborative way. That no one I work with is my age, and I learn from everybody, and I'm happy about that. I don't sit there and say, well, I'm old, so therefore you should listen to what I have to say. I say, what can you tell me that will help me make this film? And that's really fantastic. I love having mentors that are younger than me, and I have them in the art world now, the visual art world where I'm making, and I've always had them in the film world from day one. I always work with people that were much younger than me because they knew what I needed to know. It's not about, youth or the great thing about the internet, for example, is that no one cares how old you are. If you want to learn how to play Stairway to Heaven on a guitar, there's a 12-year-old kid who will shoot a video and put it up there and you go, that's how you do the frets. And that's the fingering that I was looking for. No one cares how old you are. I love that. And culturally, it's pretty much the same thing. No one cares, whether I started 15 years ago or 55 years ago. As long as you're doing your best and taking your shot and getting we aspire for our films to be special, to be important. I mean, 2 films on Netflix and that, in the last 7 years, that's the gold standard now. It's a theatrical release, which we've had, a few times now, and streaming. That's what everybody aspires to, particularly in the documentary world. So, we aspire to make great films. It's not a hobby. We're serious as a heart attack about doing it, but we do take it, very joyfully and, just try to do our best.
Now, one thing you said, fighting the practice versus fighting the story. I kind of want to, I'd love for you guys to expand on that. It's something you said earlier on, Dennis, that's just been at the back of my mind. I wrote it down on a sticky note and it's just been circulating. this last week or so. Could you talk a little bit more about that, fighting the practice versus fighting the story?
Well, I had a T-shirt made for my staff at a arts organization that I ran, and it was a statement by the founder of the organization 50 or 45 or 50 years ago. She said, "Ideas are a dime a dozen. Execution is what counts." And so finding stories is pretty easy, but having a good filter to select a great story is really important. Um, and so that's great, and a lot of people can even do that. But then when it comes down to actually making the film, it's like digging a ditch. Sometimes you just got to keep going. You've just got to, when Dee is in there and she's trying to power through this 7-minute piece. I mean, she gets pretty crazy sometimes. It gets really hard. And so fighting the execution of the film is something we do all the time. We don't fight the story too much. We let the story tell us what it wants to be. It's very important in filmmaking to let that happen, and particularly in documentary filmmaking, because you don't know what's around the corner. And if you pretend you do, then your film gets really small really fast. So, Dia, what do you think? I mean, the execution part, it's just hard sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, I think the best way to explain it, that it's a process of discovery. Yes, we sort of know where we want to go, but we don't know how we're going to get there.
Mm-hmm. Perfectly
Um,
said.
yeah, and we have to be able to discover it. If we did know, it wouldn't be fun. There wouldn't be a process.
Yeah.
If we knew all the stops and exactly where we're going and we get there, then we just get there. Right. But again, it's that idea of like there's going to be obstacles and we just have to find a way around them, right? It's not going to be a straight line. There's going to be stops along the way, right? That we have to take, and we have to entertain those moments and spend time there because there's something to be learned in that moment. And so I think that's what ultimately it boils down to it, being able to allow the process to happen. That's the process. That is the actual way of making the film that we value, I think, in the way that we do it, is that we allow for these stops to happen, the detours, the momentarily pauses where we reassess. We will think about, okay, do we have this? Do we need to go farther into that? Do we need to go in a new direction? All of that is part of the process.
Bless you.
And the agony, right? We don't know where it's going to lead us, but without it, we wouldn't have a result to celebrate, something that we are happy about, something that we are pleased to celebrate. So it's it's those little small victories along the way.
Yeah, one of the things I love, one of my favorite
Yeah.
moments in each film is when Dee and I will talk about one of those vignettes, those story beats I was telling you about, and she'll go away and we won't talk for sometimes, weeks. And she'll say, "Take a look at this." And she'll send me 5 minutes or 7 minutes or 3 minutes. And that is so fun to say, well, I never really thought of that story point as evolving that way. And so you learn a lot about yourself and about who your collaborators are when you get those cases of first impression, when she sends you her minutes for the first time and you watch and you go, "Oh God, that's such a great idea." Like what, that was never in my consciousness about the film. And other times you say, "This is good, but I think we've got to go back and, like I said, I'm always saying we got to tell the story a little more linearly, and that's probably our biggest discussion all the time is that idea of melding, the car on the superhighway with the stops along the side of the road to smell the roses. And that's really, everybody has their pinch points about what's difficult for them, and that's our pinch point. I've learned to back off tremendously because I'm the better for it, and so is the film. But it's still there. My baser instincts are always to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And that's, you don't have to do that in filmmaking, which is great. I'm writing a book right now. It's called Confessions of an Obsessive Art Collector, because I've been doing that for a long time.
I like the
And
title.
I'm it's hard. It's hard in a different way. And um, I tried to tell the story chronologically, and I couldn't. I worked at it for months and months and months. So now I'm telling the story on a collection. I've had 5 different kinds of art that I collected. So I'm using those as kind of the linchpin for each of the stories. And it's very different than filmmaking. This will probably be my first and last book. I can tell you that, because it's way more fun hanging out with
Yeah.
Dia and talking about stories and, and going and shooting and, sitting down with somebody to do an interview. You get the good stuff. You go have a sandwich. You go out to dinner. The book, you're just alone there at the desk, just grinding away. So
Yeah.
it's a very different type of practice, artistic practice. Dia, did you
I
write like when you were beginning as a professor and things? Were you mostly a maker, or did you ever like write film theory and stuff like that?
Yeah, I mean, I came from a heavy writing program as an undergrad. That was my thing. It was writing, but I never really. I was really good at at writing essays, not fiction.
Hmm.
None of that. And
Hmm.
fiction was
So
a
film
challenge.
theory would have been a
Yeah, and that was that was the challenge for me. I was like, I really don't get this fiction thing. What is it about it? And really, I mean, now, of course, in film, it's a whole different medium, right? It's an audiovisual medium, and it really challenged me in many ways. And I completely devoted my studies in understanding narrative filmmaking, right? I was very much trained as a narrative filmmaker, not realizing how important storytelling is in documentary work. But I was not interested in documentary. I was like, I really have to conquer narratives. I really have to understand what makes fiction work.
Is there a
And I
film
really
or two?
came. Sorry,
I'm
no,
wondering though, is
I was
there a
gonna say
film or
that yeah, it came from a conviction that there is truth in fiction, right?
Mhm.
That there is a lot of truth in fiction.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and I felt like fiction was the more honest way to talk,
Hmm.
to express yourself.
And I discovered you
But
were wrong about
documentaries,
that the whole
yeah, I
time. So.
really was, as a student, I was very arrogant and very against documentary work as a film student, because I thought documentary work, um, in some way can be exploitative, right? Where you take somebody's story and you make it your own and you put it out there and they don't have control over it. So it was a very, very simplistic. Now, in retrospect, I realize that's a very, very simplistic way of seeing, the,
She was
the,
22 then too, so
the
it's okay.
process.
So
Oh,
my
Yeah.
age, yeah.
yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
and I think life has been a big lesson. I mean, like, everything that happens in my life is like to prove me wrong. So now I only do documentary work.
When you think about when you're editing and you think about the
Yeah,
films that we've made, is
yeah.
there a documentary film out? I have one. I'll talk about in a second. But is there a documentary film out there that you think about when you're making our films?
Not I mean, not a specific project, but I'm very much admired observational documentary, right? Direct cinema. I thought that was,
Like
my
Frederick
heroes.
Weissman, you think about like that kind
Exactly,
of stuff?
Frederick Wiseman and uh, yeah, and God, the brothers. It'll come to me. Grey Gardens, right? Like, this type of filmmaking. Basically, that was for me like the purest documentary form, and I very much approached documentary that way in the beginning. It was like, okay, we don't
Yeah.
want to meddle with this universe. We just want to observe it, as if
Yeah.
observing is purer than actually going in there
I'm smiling because that interests me not at all.
yeah, right.
And
We're
for me,
completely
the reason
different.
is because it's a total lack of control. And it also
Yeah,
doesn't
absolutely.
feel like a good time investment result ratio. Like those guys are willing to sit there for weeks at a time.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah, yeah,
And
yeah,
let the
yeah,
film run through the gate,
yeah,
and
yeah,
I just
yeah.
want to like sit
Yeah.
down. I will interview you, boom, let me move on.
Yeah. As I said, filmmaking is a humbling, it's an empowering and at the same time very humbling
Yeah.
experience for me. Yeah. So I've learned, I've obviously the more I work in documentary, I'm still learning, with documentary. I don't have a specific one film that dictates everything the
Yeah.
way I film with fiction, but and maybe that's a good thing. I feel like I'm very much a student of documentary still. I'm still kind of like learning what, pushing the limits, what we can do. But at the same time, I try to be very, very respectful. I worked early on with photojournalists and doing work on people who photograph or shoot their own things. And one of the things that they instilled in me early on is like you don't want to interfere with somebody's work. You have to respect it, right? You have to really, you can reframe a picture. I was so nervous about reframing Anna Bunny's work, right? Because her frame is the way she chose to do it, right? The way she chose to photograph everything, the composition in the image is dictated by that, and that's part of her art.
Yeah.
So,
Michael, do you have a touch? Yeah.
that's why I think we always have to. I mean, we try to find a balance, right? How much can you interfere without interfering? Right? How much can you go in without altering, or how do you do it with respect, right? So, like for example, with Naked Ambition, we went from a finished feature film where you could see the entire photo with a lot of black around, right, to a different version. At some point where we actually had this conversation, we went back and forth, and we decided, you know what, her work is better appreciated when it fills the screen. And kind of like trying to still do justice to the work without
Yeah.
we're still finding a way to present your work as beautifully as we can, and trying to preserve that element of your work, the beauty of your work, and basically compromising on that idea of like, no, it has to be with the actual frame,
Yeah.
which is what we started with.
Photography presents better as a full screen than
Yeah.
painting, sculpture, things like that. It just feels more animate, frankly. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, these are the kinds of debates that we have. Believe it or not, we will debate on this for a
They're
while
big
until,
decisions for the
yeah,
film, I think.
these are the decisions
Yeah.
that stylistically, aesthetically, you may think, oh, that was an easy one to make. No, that was not a very easy one to
Yeah.
make. That was a really hard one to make.
Michael, you
Um,
have a touchstone film a touchstone film for you that you look
Mm.
back on and it kind of drives you sometimes, consciously or unconsciously.
Yeah. You know the movie Boyhood by Richard Linklater?
yeah,
I've recently explored his movies. I think he's definitely my favorite director right
He's
now.
pretty amazing.
It's
And
kind of
that film is particularly amazing because it's so out of character for him.
yeah, and it's kind of what you guys were talking about with patience over time, right? He let the main character, he let everyone grow up, and he explored different facets of their life, revolving around the main character, of course, kind of showing how people's lives fall in and out of place, kind of what you guys are doing with documentary filmmaking.
Yeah.
It just left
Do
a
you,
very strong impression on me.
yeah. Do you guys teach 7 Up, 14 Up, 21 Up, that British film where he followed?
oh yeah, for many
Yeah.
many
Have you
years.
ever
Yeah,
seen
I mean, I
those,
don't
Michael?
particularly,
Yeah.
sorry, I'm
The
stepping on.
filmmaker picked off a group of people, kids at 7, went back 7 years later at 14, went back 7 years later at 21. I think he just got to 56 years old, I think. And so it's Michael's something. I'm sorry. I should know all these, but the name of the filmmaker. But if you just put 7 Up, 14 Up,
Mhm.
it's all, you won't have a hard time finding it. And it's observational, and it shows you in such basic detail how people's lives change over time without any other outside stimuli in the film. It's just,
Yeah.
I was doing this and now I'm doing that,
I
you know?
I think it's the outside stimuli because most movies, they need conflict to keep the plot going. That's why I like Richard Linklater's movies. Like, he still keeps you engaged without adding extraneous conflict. Like, it feels natural.
Yeah.
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 And I mean, his movies like Before Sunrise, After Sunset, Before Midnight, like those
Yeah.
up my tier of what like a romantic movie should be.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. For me, a film that's really, I think about a lot, I think about it often when I'm making a film is Searching for Sugar Man.
Mm.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
it's a film that where I'm really careful sometimes to not find myself in that situation, but they found the ending first in their archival work and built an entire film around what I would describe as a glorious ending. And it's almost like, it feels almost like a narrative fiction film. I taught it in when Dia invited me to teach for a couple of years. I taught it in my class, and it just feels so real. That's a not. I mean, the guy won the Academy Award. He also committed suicide soon thereafter. The director.
Yep.
But it's for me. I always think about that because of what Dia was said. There's observational, kind of documentary filmmaking where you really try not to intrude, but you're still making huge decisions in the edit room. I loved Les Plaisirs, the movie that won something about the restaurant Trogros in France. I have actually been there. It's a 3-star Michelin restaurant, and they were there for days and weeks and months, but they probably shot 500 hours of footage. So anytime you go back into the edit room, you can pretend like, oh, but this is what I shot. You're still making decisions the whole time. You're making decisions. It's a million decisions in a 5-minute film, million decisions. And you don't want to forget that because, documentary doesn't necessarily mean, quote, truth. Documentary means documentary. And it's very easy to get caught up into the idea of, in a documentary, that somehow you have an obligation as a filmmaker to have a predetermined outcome that somehow is in some way veritas, and it's just not true. You go in there, you make your film the way you want to make it. We talked earlier about how we like to make films that frankly are a little hagiographic. They're a little honoring, and other people come in and they're just looking to, to kind of grit it up, So, you can talk all you want about how you think it's supposed to be truth, but in fact, it's simply supposed to be capturing something that exists in a way that you choose to present it. Big difference.
And kind of, well, I wanted to add to that. I mean, Dee was mentioning earlier, like there's truth, a lot of truth in fiction too. That's something I find as well, which goes against some documentary films, which might not be as truthful.
Life is messy.
Oh,
Real
yeah.
life is messy.
Oh, yeah.
And you can take a fictional film in order to drive home a very specific issue, point of view, moral fiber thing that you're trying to tell. So yeah, fiction can be way cleaner, when you're trying to make a movie.
Yeah. It's just fiction doesn't have this existential issue about truth, in the way that it exists in the documentary universe, right? It's like, is it true or is it? I mean,
Or as I like to say, life is messy.
Yeah,
That's
yeah. And as Dennis said, there's no such thing as objective, work in a documentary. Everything is subjective. It's just that when we do fiction, there's no question about that, right? Where we do documentary, people, have certain ideas or expectations. But yeah, I think for me, every film is a very personal film, right? Or the way we approach it, it becomes a very personal film.
Yeah, and also like fiction, it's masked in a different reality, which sometimes allows you to explore the truth further and to go deeper in a different world.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, Michael, we want you to go make something so we can interview you next time.
Guys, I would love that. I can't thank you too enough for talking with me today, sharing your insights, and being yourselves, most importantly. I'm super excited to go and explore more of your works these next couple of weeks. And thank you.
Yeah,
it's my pleasure. Dia, that was a fun time.
Thank you, Dennis, and thank you, Michael. We're looking forward to supporting you in your projects.
Thank you, guys, and I'll continue supporting you on yours. Guys, thank you for watching today's episode. Again, there's an interactive version of it on Click where you can answer questions, provide feedback more often, giving you a more immersive experience, kind of as if you were a part of today's conversation. If you'd be interested, please click on the link down below.